Learning that the Prophet was a bill collector for the Public Service Company was surprising at first. But desperate times call for desperate measures. I felt sorry for all of Jeffersonville, not just the Prophet. The real story of what happened, not only to the Prophet, but all of Jeffersonville, was far worse than the life story could have ever captured. I began to wonder why he needed to change the details. The factual history was far more heartbreaking than the story that he described. I was also curious about his temporary change in lifestyle. There was no doubt that the Prophet had plenty of money before the flood, and he may have been poor for a brief time while living with his mother, but his financial struggles did not appear to last very long. The research painted the picture of a quickly restored, wealthy lifestyle, at least compared to the average American during the Depression. I began searching to see how long the Prophet lived with his mother. I found in a 1942 Jeffersonville Evening News article describing the Prophet that he had caught a wolf northwest of Henryville, and the newspaper told his story and described the Prophet. By 1942, he was living at 922 East 8th Street. He had worked for the Public Service Company for years, but for at least 2 months he was no longer a bill collector. He was working as a line patrolman. The interesting part for me, however, was not the wolf caught in a trap. The Prophet was recognized for owning many hunting trophies. By 1942, he was already making big game hunting excursions and was planning on another in October of that same year. How was he paying for these excursions on public service wages? When I thought about the Prophet taking hunting excursions during the Great Depression, a time when most Americans struggled to keep food on the table, in a city where a large percentage of people lost everything to the flood, I became more curious about his role as pastor. A pastor is a shepherd to his flock, a servant to his congregation. I had a difficult time imagining a pastor who was flaunting trophies from excursions in front of the people of Jeffersonville. Jeffersonville was a town where many were still rebuilding from the tragic loss of all their possessions. But I was beginning to realize that this was no ordinary pastor, and he was not ordained as just a minister. How much of his mission aligned with his mentor, Roy E. Davis? It was time to dig even deeper into the early stages of his public ministry. The 1940 Olympics were scheduled to be held in Tokyo, Japan. In March of 1938, however, Japanese military demanded Olympic venues be built out of wood instead of steel. They needed the material to produce arms for the war that was already raging with China. The Olympic event was moved to Helsinki, but that was also canceled. With global war spreading, the Olympic Games would have been far too dangerous to attend at any location. Local Louisville and Southern Indiana athletes banded together in protest of the cancellation and joined a nationwide amateur athletic union movement against canceling the 1940 Olympics. The Louisville AAU committee received notice that the games had not yet been canceled, which added fuel to the fire. Soon after, Louisville athletes joined New Albany and Jeffersonville. Among them was Henry Branham, the Prophet's brother. He was one of 2 bantamweight boxers from Jeffersonville, Indiana. While the Prophet was living with his mother, Henry made local headlines and quickly became the center of attention. Walter Corey, pro boxer, claimed that Louisville's best would struggle against Henry. According to the newspapers, Kenny Barrett was the king of the South, and Henry was his able contester. Barrett had made the quarterfinals in Chicago and lost to Jimmy Joyce from Gary, Indiana. Henry fought his way into the inter-city boxing matches at the Louisville Sports Arena. Henry, along with several others, represented Southern Indiana. In July, he was carded to participate in 30 rounds at the Louisville Amateur Boxing Club. While Jeffersonville was slowly rebuilding from the damage left by the flood, Henry would have been seen as a local hero. This made me curious about the Prophet's own claim to be a professional boxer. The Prophet claimed to have won the bantamweight championship for 3 states. In fact, he claimed to have had an opportunity for the world championship and forfeited. Yet when I looked at the old photos of the Prophet, I did not see a boxer. The photographs capture a scrawny man, not a fighter. Nor was I able to find any mention of the Prophet in the news while his brother was making headlines. And a two-brother championship boxing duo would have made not just local but also national news. Was the Prophet jealous of his brother's success in the championship? He said, "I used to be a boxer. I had the undefeated title of Bantamweight Championship of the 3 states, and so I know what grip is." He also said, "I was a young fellow and straight in the shoulders, and I'd won the Bantamweight Championship in the Golden Gloves and went out in professional fighting.